All right. So what we're here today for is I'm going to go over 5, and I originally called it 5 new features in Lightroom Classic, but they're really more like forgotten features or things that I find as I work with photographers. And I'm answering questions very regularly with my podcast. People send questions into the show constantly, and I see a similar thing around these features where they have no idea these are even there in Lightroom. So Adobe hasn't done a really good job in making sure everyone is aware of them. So we're going to go through those 5 features, and I'm going to explain what they are and how we use them. And they're really features that I consider to be meaningful. So let's look at that here. These are the 5 meaningful, and I'm going to call them new because they may be new to most of you. I would guess a lot of these are going to be new to you. You may not have heard of them. So we're going to talk about embedded and SIDECAR previews. We're going to talk about profiles, the develop panel, and the custom order, SENSEI enhanced, basic auto, and
you want to read another
range
book
masks.
so we can get another 15 minutes?
All right. May want to, there we go. So we're going to start off with the first poll. So I'm going to start that. It's the speed poll here, and we'll launch that poll. All right. I'm going to do end. And let's share the results here. So do you see the screen here that has the results on it?
Yes, we can see those results.
Okay, so do you think Lightroom is slow? We had 27% say yes, 36% say sometimes, and wow, 36% of you say no. That's pretty amazing, because this is probably the thing I hear most about is just how slow Lightroom is for them. Number 2, do you think the import process is slow? We have most of you saying sometimes, some of you, one of you, very painfully so, and then yes. So I guess I didn't really give you a no. Oh, there's a works great for me. So we have some of you that say it's working really well. All right. Do you build standard previews on standard or one-to-one previews? And this is very common. I see this a lot, that people aren't sure. They don't know what that is. And I'll show you exactly what we're talking about. It has to do with the first feature that we're going to go over. And then do you use a culling tool like Photo Mechanic before Lightroom? And we only have one person who said that they did, which is also a very common thing that I see. And it's also, don't feel bad if you were one of those that said, what is culling? Because that's also, it's like a word we use in, I don't know why in photography, we have these words that we insist on using words that a lot of people don't understand. Now, culling is not unique to photography. Culling is just the process of picking the best out of a group of things, and that's what you're doing with your photos. You're going through shots that you took on a shoot, and you want to pick the best ones because you're going to edit the best ones and may not edit them all. That's a process called culling, and you may not have heard that, but it's the same with like culling cattle, and there's lots of areas where it's the same thing, same process. And so let's go through now, and I'll help explain why it is that we went through that question. Let's start with our first feature. And new, right? October 2017 is when this was introduced, and yet I'll bet almost none of you have ever heard of this. Just really quickly, has anyone heard of embedded in SIDECAR files previews? Have you seen that before? Good. All right. Yes. I'm glad to hear that some of you know about it. That's excellent. I'm gonna stop there, and I'm gonna go into Lightroom. So what I'm gonna show you is we're going to import. I'm going to do it live here, which is always extremely dangerous. But I have photos from a soccer game that we shot this last weekend. My son's with the team, and there's 851 photos that came from the shoot. Now, of course, not all 851 are good photos. This is sports. We're trying to capture the peak of the action. And even the exposure, and there's a lot of things going on here that could make these photos not great. But if I'm going to import those photos, which is really pretty easy to do when you drag and drop them, I'm going to show you how we can import those 800 and something photos really fast. It's not going to take all that long to do it. Where some of you may have been thought like, well, if I was going to import 800 and something photos at once, then I probably would have needed to, push the button and I'm going to go get a cup of coffee while I wait for everything to finish. And of course, since I'm doing it live, it's going to go extremely slowly, but there we go. Okay, now they're coming in. Okay, so this is the view you normally see. We have all the images. I know I don't want those two, so I'm not even going to import those exposure test shots that were way too dark, or maybe forgot to change any settings before we started shooting. So I have 851 photos that I want to import. Here's the key to it. This is what was added. Over here, by default, when you are importing photos, Lightroom is set to build standard previews. And these are previews that are used only in the library module. They are not used in the develop module where you're going to spend most of your time. So if you don't actually use the library module in Lightroom, the building standard or one-to-one previews is a complete waste of your time. They will not get used if you don't use the library module. So I think, even if you do intend to use the library module, and you want to have better images, you want to see an image, have a better preview of that image, it will build it in real time as you zoom in on a single image if you need it. So, but the embedded and SIDECAR process it's importing your raw files, and this is really only helpful if you shoot raw. If you're shooting JPEG, this doesn't materially change anything for JPEGs. But if you're shooting raw, every camera, regardless of brand, puts a JPEG inside the RAW file. And what you're telling Lightroom to do when you choose embedded and SIDECAR is you're telling Lightroom to not build any previews, just use the JPEGs that are already inside your RAW file and use those in the library module so that it can be super fast to do the import and do like a culling process in Lightroom. So minimal, it doesn't even pull the JPEG out. So it can be really fast, but then using the library module can be really horrifically slow after that. So I wouldn't recommend minimal, but embedded in SIDECAR, you're going to use those JPEGs. Now, depending on your camera, Sony cameras, for example, put in such itty bitty JPEGs into their RAW files. That can be a challenge to judge your photos if you shoot Sony, and there's some other brands that their JPEGs are pretty small that they put in there. But Canon, Nikon, they put in really high quality previews, JPEG images inside the RAW that you can use in the library module and do a good job of judging which photos you're going to work on. So that's
Jeff?
Yeah.
So if you're using the JPEGs in the library, when you go to the develop module, does it import then the RAW?
The develop module is always, okay, I'll give you that. There's a caveat, but you should think of it as it's always going to go to the RAW file. It doesn't matter what previews you build here. Standard one-to-one do not get used in develop. They have nothing to do with the develop module. So it doesn't help you to build those previews in the develop module. The only caveat to that is if you build smart previews, and which is another setting we'll have down in a second. But the smart previews, it still will use the RAW file if the RAW file is found on your computer. It only is going to really use the smart previews if you set it specifically to do that, which is a setting you can set in Lightroom. They added that a little bit ago too, several years ago. But other than that, it's always going to go to the RAW file. It will never use the standard or one-to-one previews. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so.
So build smart previews. This is the checkbox right here. That's that very thing. Smart previews are intended to be like little RAWs. They're DNG formats that are very close to, like, you get a very good feel for the full quality of the RAW file in a much smaller size. So it's going to take your very high megapixel image RAW file, and it's going to create a DNG that is more like the resolution of your monitor, and that's all you're going to have. So you can even export, as long as it's within those smaller resolutions, you can export off of a smart preview. But that's the only thing that will get used in the develop module, not anything from these. Okay, so
Jeff, one quick question.
Yeah.
When I transfer the files, it's transferred as DNG. So I should not transfer as DNG because That's how I import the files.
Yeah, so there's nothing wrong with importing them from your camera's RAW format to DNG, but there's also no benefits to. Adobe wanted it to be. They've tried really hard. They were hoping that the camera industry would adopt DNG as the RAW format in their cameras. They really wanted that to happen. Nobody did. Well, there is a couple of models of cameras that do write to DNGs directly, but everyone writes to their own standard and their own RAW format. So the advantage Adobe was hoping you'd have is if you copied it from that RAW format that's specific to your camera and you converted it to DNG on import, they were hoping that would make it more portable, it'd become universal as a format, and you could share it with other people and they'd be able to read it. It hasn't turned out. It hasn't worked. So my opinion is there's not any drawbacks other than the time that it takes to convert from the RAW format that is your camera to the DNG format. It adds considerable time to it. So no, I recommend not using DNG when you copy it because the benefits just have never been realized.
Jeff, could you explain why you said if you don't use the library module?
Yep.
I use the library module.
Good. And you should. And as we import, and let's kick this off too, because it'll still take a little bit of time to import 851 photos. So let's hit import now. And they're coming in, and you can see the operation up here. I'll just kind of leave that open. All right. So while these are coming in, so right now what Lightroom is doing is it's going to every one of those RAW files that were on my computer's hard drive, and it is pulling the JPEG image out of the RAW file, and it is storing it as a kind of embedded preview for all the images. But I don't have to wait for that to be done. I can start going through this right now. And you can see that first phase, it already finished. So it's already imported all 851 images into the database that's behind Lightroom. And now it's pulling out those JPEG images out of all those files. And unless you think that this is because I'm using some monster machine here, that why it's working faster than maybe you have seen in the past. This is a machine that I built. It is a custom PC that I built, but it's 2014 is the age of this PC. So this is not top of the line hardware. This is not the newest kind of equipment. This is pretty old kind of hardware. And I don't have to wait for this to be done. I can start culling right now. So I have these previews right here that are up, and I can change like the thumbnail size, and we can use all of the the library features to be able to cull the images. And if I want to see something larger, I can hit the E key for loop view, and I can see it larger. And you'll notice down here, it says embedded preview. So it's showing me the JPEG that was inside the RAW file right now. And I can get a pretty decent look at what it is that this image is about. And if I hit the right arrow, I've already transferred to the next one. So again, this process is still going on. It's still importing, but I can start culling my images right now. I can give them star ratings if I find one I like. I can move from image to image really fast. There's no loading message that's happening. It's all super, super quick to be able to do this and bring it in. And if you have a computer newer than 2014, this probably goes even a little faster for you to be able to do this and have it come out. So as you come through, so let's say, I don't know, we've got to find an image here that is kind of fun. A whole bunch of normal kinds of shots. All right, so this one, no. And I haven't gone through these at all. So these are all, there we go. There's one that's kind of nice. I kind of like that one. So I would in culling, there's a whole different discussion about the culling process and what you'd do, but I'd probably give this a 2-star rating is my system. That means to me, this is worth a second look. And my goal as I would go through this would be to get through it as fast as I can. I've got 851 images that I need to go through and find the best ones. And there's a whole bunch I don't like. I'm not even going to rate the ones that I don't care about. I'm going to give a 2-star rating for the ones that I think are worth doing. And if there's one that I really think is worth looking at, then I'll go ahead and give it a 3-star rating. I don't go any more stars than that because you spend all this time like, well, is it a 3? Is it a 4? Is it a 5? There's all this deliberation and everything. things. So this isn't a thing about culling. I don't want to go through that more. But in the library module, you have all of these different things. This is the grid view. You use G to get to the grid view, E for loop view. You have compare, you have survey. There's a lot of capability and functionality here. And those embedded in SIDECAR files can, for most cameras, be plenty for you to be able to figure out if you need if you want to keep that image. Now, an example, if you wanted more detail and you needed to get in, so I'm using the embedded preview, but if I click in to zoom in, now I'm telling Lightroom, I want more detail. I want to see more detail in the library module on this image. Maybe I want to check focus. And you can see that I don't have a ton of detail at the moment. Lightroom in the background, if the import was done, it would be working on building a standard or one-to-one preview to use inside of the library module. So if there's an image where you do want to see the more detail, Lightroom's going to give it to you. It may take a moment for it to happen, but it will go and do that to be able to build that out. So that's kind of the functionality inside of the library module, where I don't think for most photographers you need to waste the time on import to do the standard or one-to-one previews, because the embedded previews are pretty good. Does that answer your question about library module and using it?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so that is a way to be able to speed up your import process. And if you're not using Lightroom to do culling, you don't have a culling process, I have a Photo Taco episode about it where I tell you my process. If you want to go check that out, you can go to phototacopodcast.com and search for embedded previews, and you'll see there's several episodes where I talk about that. All right, let's go to our next poll. So I'll go fire that off right now. We'll go to the slowness myths. Sorry. First it was slowness myths. All right. And this is a question I get constantly too. Whoops, I don't want to start from the beginning. We're going to go to, there we go. Okay. I get questions all the time about the catalogs. I already mentioned that this is not a fast machine. The other thing though, and I'll go back into Lightroom and show you, so you may have thought, well, but you may not have that many photos. Like maybe it's fast because you don't have that many images that are in your catalog. My catalog currently has 128,829 images in the catalog. And so I've heard this advice that comes from really dated information with Lightroom, where the recommendation was something along the lines of, if as soon as you get to like 10,000 photos, Lightroom slows down, you need to create a new catalog and start importing your photos into that catalog. It is absolutely a myth. That is not helping you increase performance. I have done a test where I imported 1 million photos into the catalog. To get that, I had to copy photos like crazy to get to 1 million of them, but I've imported 1 million photos so that to Lightroom, they were all unique. And there is really no slowdown. Behind Lightroom, there's this technology called SQLite. It's a database thing that's been around for ages. It can handle high volumes of data and not be a problem. And because it's a database technology, there's indexes, and that makes it so that it's possible to find things, create new images, add images to it. It's a technology that is very old, and that doesn't mean it's bad. It means it's proven. It means that it's capable of doing massive things, and it's just not true that you need to separate your catalogs for performance reasons. Now, if you want to separate your catalogs for other reasons, if there's an organizational thing that will help you if you have separate catalogs, then that's great. Go ahead and do that. I personally think that's also a mistake, because some of the features or the support that Lightroom gives you is things like, if you do keywording, you can do searches on those keywords. And if you have multiple catalogs, that means you got to open up every single catalog to do your searching if you're trying to find them. And this is what it's built for. Lightroom is built to manage your catalog of photos, all of your catalog of photos. And if you do a good job with all of it, you can search on metadata, you can search by dates. There's some really good capabilities there to be able to find photos. And if you've separated your catalogs, you're hampering that functionality, and it's a problem. So performance myth is you need to separate your catalog when you get to a certain number of photos. It's just not true. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. Now we're ready for our next poll. Better on back is the name of this poll. So we'll launch that poll. It's only 3 questions.
I don't use Lightroom.
Oh, well then, this whole presentation's lost on you. What do you use instead? Capture One?
Camera Raw.
Oh, okay. Oh, well then, yeah, most of this still won't apply. There's the engine in Lightroom for the develop module and Camera Raw are exactly the same. It's the same thing. They are upgraded in lockstep in Photoshop. So if we talk about things in the develop module, then it would apply. But I think there's one tip, and it probably still is only Lightroom specific. So that won't.
Well, I'm trying to learn Lightroom.
Okay. Well, if you're used to Camera Raw, then you're most of the way there.
I always just forget that they're there, the presets.
Yes. Well, and okay. So let's get into this. Let's go now to this next feature. Who has anyone heard of profiles in Lightroom before? Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Okay, good. It was introduced in April 2018. Adobe was really, really happy with it, and I was too. And there's an important reason why I was really happy with it. And here's what they said when they released it. This is how they described the profiles. So they said it's for RAWs, not for JPEGs. That's why I asked if you're RAWs or JPEGs. And they build profiles for nearly every, and I haven't run into something ever so far. I think they're just giving themselves some wiggle room there. Every camera make and model that they support. They support RAW files. If you can import the RAW files and have Lightroom deal with it, then you're going to be able to build or use profiles. I shouldn't say build. Use profiles with your applications. And this is what they changed. This feature existed prior to that date, April 2018. It existed, but it was in a spot that nobody knew about, and I'll show you in a second. And then they enhanced it, and the enhancements were the big piece of this. And this is what they said about it. Our profiles incorporate deep imaging science. Now, how many of you wouldn't want to have deep imaging science helping you with your photos? I think we all would like that. And so it takes into consideration the colors of the filters used. So it knows your camera and the type of sensor your camera has, and it considers that as you apply these profiles. It also knows the sensitivity of the sensor that's used and kind of what ISO differences there are, and analyzes the images to make it so that it adapts based on what it sees in the image. So there's a little bit, they didn't go so far as to say it is artificial intelligence, because there are features that are that way, but this is a little short of that. Still, they did use a lot of examples and tried to figure out how to build these profiles so that you get the best, it's designed to be a starting point for you where it should look like what it was when you were out shooting. Wherever you were shooting, whatever you were shooting, it should look like that and not be something totally different. And there's a link in there too about when they released it, what they said. All right, so again, base starting point. It's not really intended to be the ending point. It's just the starting point. And Adobe, when they released the feature, they had these 6 profiles that were available. We're going to go through all 6 of them so you can kind of understand when you would use which and what they do. There's another really big benefit to these profiles that I'll get to kind of at the end of talking about this feature. So let's start with Adobe Color. This is what is applied to your RAW file by default. If you do nothing when you import your photo, Adobe Color gets applied as the profile for your RAW file. When they built Adobe Color, they wanted to have it be a little bit warmer, which I personally like. I tend to overwarm my images for the most part, and I like them when there's a little bit of warmth, especially the red and orange colors in an image. They warm those. They help with the transitions between certain color ranges too, specifically the highlights. So it does a little better management of how the highlights work. For example, in a sky, when you're taking a landscape and there can be the banding trouble, they tried really hard to make it so that the Adobe Color profile addresses that, at least in part. It won't make it perfect perfect on everything, but it made improvements. And then slightly increasing the contrast too. So that's kind of why it's the default, because it's kind of a catch-all, works well for nearly every type of image, and makes it so that it will be closer to what you remember when you were shooting it out at the site or out in the field or wherever you were at when you were shooting. So that's why it's the default. Any questions on that one?
Yes. Are these your test quotes or descriptions, or are these descriptions from Adobe?
This is from Adobe. Yep. This is from this link right here at the bottom of the screen.
Okay.
I just added the highlights, to the things that were important to me.
Okay.
Question for you.
Yeah.
Nikon, on the Nikon cameras, they have different presets for different conditions. What does Adobe do if you use the different presets on the Nikon?
Excellent question, and I will answer that when we're in Lightroom. Is that okay?
Got it.
Okay. So I'm going to show you how to get to this, because it's sort of hidden. They didn't do a good job. How important this feature is, they didn't do a good job of making it visible as you're stumbling through the user interface. Like it's hidden. So I'll go through it, but we'll talk about what that means. Okay, so Adobe Monochrome. It's been carefully tuned, they said. Better tonal separation and contrast. So yeah, you take out the color, you now have removed part of what makes things separate from one another. And really the brightness is all you have left to make it so that you can distinguish the edges of things. And so you usually need better separation between those colors when they're only luminance and contrast too. You need both. You need to increase both to make it so you can really see the details in an image. And monochrome is built to work, for the most part, give you a really good starting point for black and white images so that you get that separation and contrast if you apply that profile. Any questions there? All right.
Yeah, yes. On the monochrome?
Yep.
So it changes the image different than if you would just desaturate it down in the HSL panel or something like that?
It does. Yep. It does different than that. Yep.
And so what about if you use a shortcut V when you turn it into monochrome? Does it apply the profile, or is that just a desaturation?
Nope. It's just the desaturation. So yes, if your goal is to go black and white, the first part I would do, because again, these are meant to be starting points, and then you edit your image from there, I would go apply the monochrome profile first and then go to the saturation panel and change things from there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Adobe Portrait, optimized for skin tones and less contrast and saturation, because people look better when we don't see every single edge and feature when we're in portraits. So unless you're going for a very athletic, edgy kind of look, then this is a good starting point specific to a portrait. So it would be better to choose this if it is indeed a portrait than Adobe Color that it defaults to as a starting point for you to go and edit your images. Then, of course, you can start playing around with texture and contrast and all the other sliders from there with Adobe Portrait. So designed specifically to make the skin tones look great. Any questions? It's pretty self-explanatory, right? Landscape, again, pretty self-explanatory here too. They just did a lot of work to make it so that it handles the skies and foliage the very best it can. Different from Adobe Color, because this is when you can tell Lightroom that this is a landscape image and you want to process it like a landscape, then it knows there's some things that it can do to give you a really good starting point that is better than what you would get if you just imported. So it's really important as a feature to use these the way that Adobe, they spent so much time working on these features and nobody's using it because they can't find it. So we'll go show you how to do that and where to find it. Any questions on landscape? All right, neutral. A starting point with a very low amount of contrast. So this would be something where there's an image, specifically difficult tonal ranges. If there's a lot of differences between bright and dark in an image, there's just a huge dynamic range that you've tried to capture. Adobe Neutral is going to help you to contain that dynamic range better, give you a better starting point so that you can start to apply your edits with that really big tonal range in your image. So I might use this at a sunrise or sunset image over landscape because of the tonal ranges that are involved, so that you have a little better starting point to be able to do it. All right, and then the last one is vivid. They don't say a lot about this one. Punchy, saturated. I think they added this because the popularity of things like filters on Instagram and places like that, where that's what they see. You see a bunch of punchy and saturated stuff, and so like, all right, we'll give you one, even though this is probably not great for most photographers to use, but it's there. All right.
Question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Which of these would you use if you were doing animals, nature?
Good question. If I was doing nature, I'd probably try the animals. I'd probably try portrait for animals too, just to see. And that's one of the beautiful things about this. I'll show you when we go in the interface. You can actually see. You can get a really good preview of what it looks like between the two, and make a decision. Like you can just try both or try all six. Like,
well, you want to see the detail and the fur and the feathers and what
true.
have you. So portrait would mute that, wouldn't it?
To some degree, yes. So maybe it depends on the total range. It's a good question. There's not something specific to animals and what you're looking for, how you're looking to do it. Because there's some animals you might not want to have it be super detailed and edgy, but just applying the profiles in preview. So let's go into Lightroom, and I think maybe that'll help. So let's go back into Lightroom, and we have our images here from the soccer. Let's just use one of those images. So now you have to go to the develop module for this to work. So here's the image, and you can see it applied Adobe Color by default. So profile has been here. You've probably skipped over it almost always to be able to see it. And yeah, you can change between the 6 right here, but if you click this button over here, the thumbnails, you actually can see all of the, you get a little different thing. Like you can apply it more rigorously. You can go up to 200% if you want to on that image. You can test between the different ones right here. All I have to do is float over, and now I can see what does that do to my image if I was to apply that profile. So in this one, I don't know, maybe I want color might be the best one. Landscape's not bad though. So even though I have athletes here and I'm seeing the athletes, I kind of like the reds, although it's Canon, so it's oversaturated. I go tone that down. But you can see what it is that it does. And not only are there those favorites, or here's the Adobe raw ones, and this is where we had the question about your camera profiles. What do you do there? So here, the thing about camera profiles is a camera profile is not applied to a raw file. It is applied to a JPEG file, and it will be applied to the JPEG that gets embedded in your raw file, but it is not applied to your raw file. And so if you want to have the look that came from your camera, then you want to pick the raw file that is for your camera. And so, these are the artistic ones. Let's go back to, where's my Canon ones? There's the vintage. Oh, no, artistic. Maybe it's in here. No. So I don't know why I'm not having my Canon presets. Maybe, you know what? It's probably because these are R6 images. They don't have the Canon presets.
Bring up the drop down that you have that says profile browser. I couldn't see what you clicked.
Oh, it's this. Yeah, this is the hidden thing. This is what I was telling you, that they don't, like, it's so hidden. It's just this little grid of squares here to the right. So on this line that says profile, Adobe Color, to the right of it, there's this show profile browser. And when you click that, it brings up the profile browser. And it looks like they don't have, for the R6, they don't have my profiles yet. So, but your camera's specific profiles would show up here if they're something that Adobe's created already. So that you could choose those and apply them to your raw file and make it look like whatever the JPEG processing is that the camera does. So does that answer the question that we had there about camera profiles?
Yes.
Yes, it does. But follow on to that, does that mean that when you select in Lightroom, the correction for the aberration of the lens, does it automatically apply at that point, or do you have to go back in and mechanically do it again?
These are not, this has nothing to do with the other panels in the develop module. This is intended to be a starting point for you to edit your images, and everything else is still, so even if I choose, I'll choose a different one just so that we can do it. So I'll go and we'll choose landscape just because it's different. So now it's no longer just Adobe Color, it's Adobe Landscape, but you'll notice none of my sliders have changed at all. Nothing there. I don't have anything in lens corrections applied. Nothing has happened in the develop module. It's a starting point, and it's a really good thing because presets, and this is a question I was going to get to right after this, the difference between profiles and presets. With presets, these sliders change. The presets deal with like preset positions of adjustments and sliders and things here in the develop module. And so then if you want to take it further, you're changing stuff from there, which is fine. You have some flexibility to be able to do that. It just gives you a head start on how you want to do it. But now I have all of my options totally open to me to continue to edit this photo, and I can get different looks from different profiles. You can also get profiles. There's profiles for sale from lots of mainstream photographers who built profiles, and then they would show up in this list. You can add. In fact, so if I click this plus button, I can import profiles. Then and you could go, if there's a photographer you like who produces a look you like, they may have profiles that you can buy, be able to import them in. And then that's the beautiful thing, is you can apply the profile, and then you have all the adjustments that you can still do from there, full flexibility to be able to change it without having to kind of override what they had in their preset. Does that make sense?
Yes. So should you be shooting in RGB or sRGB then?
I have
for these profiles.
That is so profile has nothing to do with color space. So you don't have to worry about that. Color space is another massive topic, and I just recently did a podcast about that, about the recommended workflow for how to deal with color profiles. So I won't go into it here. You can go search for that if you want to go find out about that.
Thank you.
All right. And profiles, like I said, they did exist before. They were enhanced significantly. So none of these 6 Adobe defaults were around before. They had some other kinds that were there, but they were hidden down here under the calibration panel. And I probably should have asked the question in a poll about who uses the calibration panel. I love the calibration panel. It is really cool, really powerful to be able to do some shifting of the colors, and it has less banding than you get in the HSL module or in color grading. Although color grading is a little better than HSL is for that. But if you take up either the saturation or the luminance, if you make pretty significant changes in here, you increase your chances of having banding in your photo. And whereas if you use calibration, it's much less likely. You don't have to do nearly the severe changes in calibration as you do in the others. So I love calibration, but that's where it used to be located, was down there. And Adobe moved it to be in the basic panel because they thought more photographers, since you spend your time here, we all do, that this is the panel we use. They thought, well, then if it's right here, they'll use it. And they don't. Photographers still don't find it and still don't have it. All right. Any questions on this?
No, thank you.
All right. Got to move the Zoom panel around. Let's get back to our slides then. We'll go. I already explained the difference between presets. It doesn't make any changes to the sliders. Oh, the other one, LUTs. LUTs are super confusing. LUTs are really challenging to try to figure out. Video people find this out really fast early on because they're critical for them to get good color in the videos they do. It's been around for photography for a long time too. There's lots of features in Photoshop that can use LUTs, and Adobe made LUTs available to people who develop profiles. So this is how they accomplish some of the things that we were just looking at. They may define a LUT. It's a lookup table. It's like a way to convert from one thing to another. and end up with a better result. So that you can take some of the colors or some of the tones and you can convert from one to the other. And so LUTs is there in profiles so that you can bring those into Lightroom. It's not exposed in any way in Lightroom other than it can be part of a profile as a person is creating a profile, they can use them. And so there's some power in that you can't get any other way in Lightroom than through a profile. All right, let's do a next poll here. So we'll stop sharing those results. Oh, were those results showing like the whole time? All right.
No, I brought them down.
Okay, good. All right, here we go. Launching the next poll. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Share the results here. Okay, so basic panel. Of course, you all use that. That's good. Tone curve. Let's see. So a second is detail. Second and lens corrections. Right? And that makes a lot of sense about those two being used. The least used looks like it was calibration, which does not surprise me. I find most photographers have no idea it's there, or they look at it like, I don't know what this is, and they move on. It does take some getting used to figure out how to use that, but it's so powerful. Let's see, color grading. Yeah, that's so new. I don't expect a lot of photographers to have got to the point where they're really going in there a whole lot yet. Transformative effects kind of surprises me. All right, good. So do you use those panels in those orders? So this is exactly split mostly, and I skip around. So, okay, we'll talk about that. And then why. I like this. Who knows? And stupid engineers. It's funny. I love being able to put that in there because I spent a lot of my career as an engineer. So I understand a lot where it's like when I get it in front of I've spent all this time developing something, and then I get it in front of somebody that's supposed to use it. They're like, that doesn't make any sense why you did it this way. and we got to go back and rework it so that it does make sense. And Adobe has a big challenge to try to make it so that these highly technical kinds of things that we're trying to do with these images, that they can represent it in a language that makes sense and is something that can be figured out. And it's a tall task. I think Adobe can do better there, but it is a tall order. And then yes, there are good reasons for it, and there are. So we'll talk about that. All right. So I'll stop sharing those results. Let's go into this. So the develop panel custom order. This is a feature that was released in December of 2018. And when Adobe released it, they said it had been one of the top most requested features of Lightroom that year, that this was something they were hearing from customers like crazy. And I don't know how many photographers even really use it. So let's go look in Lightroom at what we're talking about here. So, all right, here we are inside of Lightroom, and we have our develop module. We have all of our panels here. And you've always been able to kind of turn on and off panels. If there was a panel you just never used, you could turn it off and make it so it went away. But now you can even if you right click on any of the title bars here of the panels and you do customize develop panel, you can choose the order that they're in as well. So if you say, well, I go from basic to detail, since that was one of our second ones, you can move detail panel so that it's back up. It's up as the second panel in the list, and it can follow how you work on images better. So to me, it's a little bit of a time-saving thing, not massive, but a little bit of customization you can do just to make it so that it's a little easier for you to use it. I find it hard to believe, or not hard to believe because I don't believe they lied about it, but I can't, it's a struggle for me to figure out, like, of all the things that customers could be asking to be done in Lightroom, this was one of their top. It's funny. All right, so I'll just flick it back to the detail order. And this is how you would turn off the panel. If there's a panel that you never use and you just rather not see it, then you can just check it off and it'll be gone. All right, so did you guys know it was there?
No.
Yes.
No.
I've rearranged the order of mine.
Yeah, they're good. I'm glad to hear that there are people that have seen this. Yeah, so it's just a little feature. Sometimes people have said, oh, that's great. And sometimes they're like, why would I care? Oh, and I need to answer the question too about why are they in this order? So let's go through that real quick. Okay, there is a method to the madness about why they are in the order they're in. Mostly it isn't workflow. It's not because they expect you to think about these things first necessarily, and then the tone curve next, and then the detail panel. It's to some degree that's there, but mostly it's because the things down at the bottom end of this panel are the most impactful to performance going forward. And I think if you start paying attention to this as you are developing, as you're using the develop module to make your adjustments, you'll be able to see, like, if you come in here and you immediately go to detail and you're like, well, I know I want a lot more sharpening and I want some noise reduction added to my image. Now, if you go back to the basic panel, these sliders are all going to perform more slowly, because every time you change a slider, Lightroom has to not only do your slider, it has to also do your sharpening adjustments and reapply all of it at the same time. So they're put in an order to facilitate performance. There is also some workflow. I mean, we all start here, so it makes sense it's the first panel. But then there's also a difference between these sliders. So I can tell you for sure, because I've done the testing on this, the texture slider is a killer to performance. It really, really impacts performance. So if you come in here and you change, like, you're not changing anything else and you just change the texture slider, you've now made all the rest of the sliders slower. So you want to, it really needs to kind of be in, if you want to get the most performance out of it, you don't want to apply the adjustments kind of down in the lower panels before you start doing the upper ones. Does that make sense?
So I have a question then. If you reorder your panels, and just for giggles, if we wanted to put calibration on top, does that screw up your performance thing?
It would, only in the fact if it made it so you went there first. So the order doesn't change how the performance works, other than it suggesting to you, like, I want to go switch the calibration and I want to use the calibration first.
Right. And that's kind of what I'm saying. If I, for whatever reason, I wanted to use calibration first, and then it would actually affect the performance of the basic panel sliders.
That's right. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Yeah, they've deliberately chosen the order of this to try to facilitate the performance to work the best.
So if you do lens correction first, that slows down basic and everything else.
It sure does, especially adjustment brushes and spot removal. It really slows those down tremendously. So you want to save lens corrections until, like, the end.
Okay, I have a question then. So if I lens correct on import, if I have that as a preset on import, I'm slowing down the whole performance of my Lightroom.
You are. Yep.
Booger.
Yes.
So if you save your lens corrections for last, doesn't that have an impact then on all of your other choices that you've already made?
It certainly could, especially vignetting and how the edges look in the images, since that's mostly what lens corrections does. A little bit too with perhaps the exposure. So it's right on all fronts. It's a chicken and egg problem. Like, if you don't apply the lens corrections up front, when you apply it at the end, you could have to, like, make some other changes. Like you might decide my highlights are too high now because after the lens corrections, and you have to go and trim them down a bit. Uh-oh. Are we still here?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, good.
It just got quiet out there.
All right. Okay, so the next feature, this is something was introduced back in December of 2017. And I hope most of you have seen this feature anyway, but I wanted to outline kind of the fact that they made a big change here. So this is what they said when they released the feature. So this is coming straight from Adobe, and there's the link down at the bottom. They said, Auto has been completely reworked to create better results every time. That's a pretty big claim. Using an advanced neural network powered. So this is actually AI. They figured out how to make Auto better by having it apply to tens of thousands of professionally edited photos. They analyzed what adjustments people were making to photos and kind of fed that into the engine so that it could learn. And in this case, this photo of leaves, when professional editors edit the photo, this is what they do to the images. And this is the presets. This is not a profile. This is the sliders in the develop module getting set to these kinds of values. So let's go look in Lightroom, and you can see where this is. I hope you've all seen it already. And here's where it is. It's just this little auto button right here. I hope you've seen it as you've done it. And if I click it, it is looking at the image and applying some more details to the image. So it thought the exposure needs to come down, contrast up, highlights. It changed my sliders in the develop module because of what it saw in the image, and they significantly enhanced it. This is a really good thing. So after applying the profile, my next step when I edit a photo is I hit the auto button just to see what it thinks. Now, I don't always agree with it. I don't always go with what it said, but it often gives me a really, really good starting point for editing the images, or at least where the sliders need to be, especially in this tone section of the panel. So I don't have to worry about where I should take these different sliders. And then I can adjust from there if I want to. But it's really, really helpful to be able to do that. So how many are you using the auto button?
Yes, most of the time.
Excellent.
Yes.
I hit it to see what it does. I don't usually agree with it.
Right.
I'm with
Always
Heidi.
give it a try.
Yeah, you don't lose anything. You can always reset back, and if you're like, "Ooh, that's terrible," I'm going back. But I wanted to point out like how much they worked on it. And if you're not using it in your workflow today, then it's worth just clicking it to see what it looks like. If you don't like it, hit reset, and you're back.
I have one question on that.
Yeah.
And it's, I think I tried at one point to apply it to like a whole folder, but it looks like, it seems like it only will work on the most selected picture.
Right. Yeah. That's not something that you could do it on the first image and then copy and paste all of your slider settings and adjustment settings to the rest of the images, but you can't select all the images and hit auto and have it do it to all the images individually. It doesn't,
Right.
It only applies to the image you're on. Yep. All right. Our last poll here. We'll launch it. Okay. Let's go over this. So do you make adjustments using the adjustment brush? Most of you do. That's good. I like to see that because it can be very, very powerful. It can also be one of the slowest things in Lightroom for sure. If you are applying adjustment brushes, your sliders are going to slow down like crazy from applying those. It really can have a big, big impact on performance. Although Adobe has done some to address that in the develop module with how they're handling the update in the navigator that's in the upper left in the film strip. You've probably noticed that if you see it much, that those things are delayed in getting updated when you apply these kinds of things. Do you use auto mask when applying adjustment brushes? So most of you do. Good. I like to see that there's these features are well known. Do you use the eraser to remove it? Most of you do. Do you make adjustments using graduated and radial filters? Most of you. Good. And erasers known. And okay, this is the one that I was most interested in. If you need to make an adjustment where you would use some of these tools to kind of target your adjustments, do you just not do it there and you just flip over to Photoshop? And most of you try to stay in Photoshop, which I do too. I love Photoshop. I like being able to edit in Photoshop, but if I go into Photoshop, it is a massive time drain, and I'm going to do way more on that image than I should be. And especially for the most of the clients that I'm working for, time is money, and I can't control myself. I waste too much time if I go into Photoshop. So if I don't need to, I stay in Lightroom if at all possible. But there is a limitation on the control that's there. And this next feature, I think, is something that can kind of be an in-between of what you may have been doing in Lightroom with these with adjustment brushes and graduated filters, graduated radial filters, and Photoshop. So let's go talk about that now. All right. So this feature is called Range Masks. It's been there since October of 2017. And I still find that a huge portion of photographers don't even know it's there because, again, it's not super obvious. So I'm going to put the zoom thing over there. Okay, let's pretend that I care about this image. This is not a great image, but let's pretend that I care about this image, and I want to apply an adjustment brush, and I want to maybe let's say, I don't know, adds a little yellow to the sky or a little blue to the sky, just as for fun. So I have some things I could do. I could try to paint it myself really close and get it to make it targeted. I could try to use auto mask, which is the thing that I asked you about. I could try to make that, and then Lightroom is going to try really hard to notice these edges and not go past the edges. So we'll turn auto mask on, and I'll start painting. And I like to paint with, I just hit O for overlay. I like to see where it is that I've painted as I'm doing it. Keyboard shortcuts are really good too. So, and if it, that it doesn't think sometimes that it needs to apply it, but we're just, we're trying to get it close here. I don't want yellow in the trees. So I paint outside. So hopefully this is something most of you have done. You've seen this, and this is very familiar, auto masking, trying to get it applied. So that's great until I got these little parts in the tree, and I got it on the pole a little bit here too. But I definitely I want to have this applied there. I don't want to apply it on the fence. Here's what we can do. This is where range masking is, this little feature right down here that a lot of photographers totally miss. And you have a few choices here. You have color, luminance, and if you took a photo with a more current iPhone or some Androids, then there was depth information. Some of those cameras record 3D depth information. You can also apply filters, range masks based on the depth of an image. So trying to fake a really bokeh background, a really blurry background, you can actually use this to select the person or just the background and not the person based on their depth information, and then try to blur the background. But we only have, this is a Canon camera, doesn't have any depth information. And so you have your choices of color and luminance. Color would be, I want you to only, I want this adjustment brush to only be applied to color. And luminance is, I want the adjustment brush to only be applied to a certain level of brightness, the tones in the image, which is what is going to help me clean up this on the tree. I don't want it to be on darker tones. And you can see as I change this range mask, I now have it targeted to where it is not being applied to the darker portions of the image. And my adjustment is much smoother and cleaner. And you can affect how smooth that goes. So if I really decrease the smoothness, I take the smoothness so to the right, makes it less smooth. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and the left makes it more smooth in between the transitions between being in the mask and being out of the mask. But now I can go and I can say, well, I wanted a bluer sky. I'll take off the overlay with the O key. I wanted a bluer sky. And now I can kind of do that. And this is a poor example, but it's the one that we had in here to be able to play around with. And I can now target that adjustment using range masks. You can show the luminosity mask too. So you can see there's some places in here I could paint in to clean up the mask a little bit and make it be applied to some areas where I didn't paint enough for it to cover everything. And I can even get in here. And so it's a little closer to something called, that's similar to like luminosity masking, if you've heard of that, in Photoshop. Now, it's not the same. For sure, it's not the same. But you can see I'm getting a much more realistic result when I'm using this over what I could have done from auto masking or any of that kind of painting, is doing these kinds of range masks. And it's a good thing to try so you don't have to go over in Photoshop. I often find, especially like if this was a real thing and I wanted to replace the sky, I'd go into Photoshop. Photoshop will do this far better than Lightroom does. But it's just a feature that is there in case you need it, and maybe can help you avoid a trip into Photoshop if you want to be able to use that. Does that make sense? Any questions on range masks?
Thank you. I forget to use them.
Yeah, they've been there for a while. And occasionally they're the right solution. Occasionally I really find them very helpful. But yeah, a lot of the times I try it and I can do better in Photoshop. So I'm going over there.
Does RAW have the same kind of range mask?
What's that?
Does Camera Raw
Yes.
also have a range mask like that?
It does. It does. But you're in Photoshop, so there's much better ways to do it than range masks in
Okay,
Camera Raw.
thanks.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So that's our 5th feature, but I'm going to give you one bonus tip. This has been something that's been around for a huge amount of time, and I think I've just found most photographers have no idea it's there. It's very simple. There's not a lot to it. Oops. Okay. If you're in the crop, and this is the default, we all have seen this, the rule of thirds crop is there. But there's also, if you hit the O key while you're in crop mode, you can change the overlay of the crop to the other kinds of cropping things. You get to the golden ratio. There's here's previews kind of if you had to crop to different sizes of prints and the grid. So you can rotate in between them. If you're having a hard time with just the rule of thirds and your image isn't really working to try to follow some sort of composition technique, then hitting the O key so that you can change the overlay to various sorts of other types of composition techniques might help you to create a more compelling image. So the O key when you're in crop. All right. That's all I had for today. Any questions that I can try to answer?
You did a very thorough job.
Yes.
So I was just playing with the crop overlay while you were doing that, and on that golden ratio, is there a way to flip it or to turn it?
There is. I'm trying to remember what the keystroke is for that, but there is a way to flip it. So X, of course, just flips the crop altogether. What was it?
I think it's Shift.
Shift O. Let's see. Whoops. Unflag. Yep. Shift O. There you go.
Well, why didn't you tell me that before?
Yep, that rotates it around so you can try to get it to line up and be there. Yep. That's great.
I have a question on lens correction.
Yeah.
I know it has different lenses, and sometimes when I do a lens correction, it doesn't show the correct lens. Even though I tell it the brand name, it just doesn't pick the right, like let's say I have a 90 millimeter, it seems to show a 23 to 70 or something like that, some crazy number.
Yeah, and it doesn't even show it in the list. Like even if you wanted to go choose it, it doesn't show it in the list, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a problem. So that has to do with the metadata that's in the image, and it especially fails a lot when you like round trip from Photoshop back to Lightroom and you're dealing with the TIFF image now. The metadata that drives those menus and the profile corrections it's not as good, or even a PSD file. You've really just changed the metadata a lot, but it can be, especially if there's a new lens, it takes a while for Adobe to get that new lens listed there. But I've even had it where it just seems unexplainable to me. Like one image from the camera will be there and I can choose that right drop down, and then another image in another editing session later, it won't be. And sometimes I've tried just restarting Lightroom to see if that helps, and it has helped sometimes. I have not ever gone into the depths to figure out what it is. I know it's a constant complaint in the Adobe forums, and something I really should go check out to see what the solution is. I know how to add a profile, because you can go create a custom profile and you can add one that's there. But I don't know how to fix it when it just won't even show the right lens. So it's a good question, and I don't know how to fix that. I've definitely seen it though, and lots of others. Like I watch the Adobe forums like crazy. I'm in there all the time trying to evaluate how safe it is for upgrades for people to apply upgrades, and I see it on a very regular basis. So people are like, why can't I apply? This is not a new camera lens. It's been there before. Why is it not now? And I haven't seen good answers for it.
So what is your current recommendation for Lightroom?
My current recommendation.
Yes, for what version?
Yep. So I'll share with you. I have my website here, Phototaco. And if you come to the website, phototacopodcast.com, and you click on this updates status page, I have the version recommendations. Like I said, I watch the forums all the time, and I'm trying to see, especially after a new release. In the time I've been watching this over the last about 8 years, every release, there's issues, there's problems that people have. Sometimes they're not so significant that it would really be a massive problem to a lot of people. But sometimes, like the October releases of both Lightroom and Photoshop, they were horrid. They were filled with bugs. And a huge portion, like an abnormal number of people were in the forum saying, I'm having a problem, I'm having a problem, I'm having a problem. And they've just had a lot of challenges. And I've got a couple of colleagues that I work with too. One of them his name is Greg Benz, who builds extensions for Photoshop. So he knows Photoshop inside and out. There's not a better guy that knows about it. He also is like, oh gosh, this October release of Photoshop has killed my extensions. It's not working right. In fact, the very most recent update that just came out here in March, he's saying, roll back. It is killing his extensions. They've got massive problems with it. And so it can be a real big issue. So here on the page, I keep this updated at least monthly, sometimes more, especially if there's a release where there's big problems, then I'll go and update this. Right now, the version of Lightroom that is most stable and works the best is 9.4. I was showing you 10 today, and that's color grading is kind of the biggest thing, but there's still lots and lots of problems that people are having. If you rely on, this page is trying to tell you, if you rely on Lightroom and Photoshop for your business, I wouldn't go beyond these versions. So I have Lightroom, Photoshop, and what version of Mac OS and Windows 10 I recommend that you run them on. And then
how do you roll back if you're on, let's say, Lightroom or Photoshop CC?
Good question. So my website here, if you come here, I've got tons and tons of articles. You can search for whatever you're wanting to do. Here's how to downgrade Photoshop and Lightroom. So if I click on that, there's step-by-step instructions on what to do to downgrade. And it's not always possible with Lightroom. If you upgraded and then you did a bunch of work in Lightroom, you imported photos and made adjustments, frequently, at least with major releases, they change the database that Lightroom is built on, and it's not compatible with going back. So if you go back, you're going to lose all the things that you've done. So it's part of the reason I created the page, was so that when a release comes out, people could come and check. And first off, I would never apply a new update in the first 2 weeks that it's released, because they are notorious for having problems in the first couple of weeks and having to put out a patch really fast to fix issues. I mean, I've seen things from corrupting catalogs, and they had to put out a patch to make it so that you didn't corrupt your catalog, which is very scary, and lots of problems. So I have like, what's the meaning of these things, and there's more detail. Here's all the versions since I made the page in 2019. So all the versions since then. My Phototaco seal of approval means there's very few issues, if any, and you're likely to be very safe in using that version. And I've got them. I update them. You can even, that's what this banner says. You want free email alerts. If you go click on that, you can sign up to get emailed whenever I update this page.
I don't remember which one, but if you open up the main screen for Adobe, it seems like it automatically updated without me even telling it to update.
Yes, by default, that's what it's set to. So that's the Creative Cloud app. And by default, it is configured to auto update your apps. So you have to turn it off if you don't want them to be auto updated. So enable auto update. See, it's hidden too. They don't want you to not do it. They want you to get the latest version. And sometimes there's good, they don't want people to miss out on features, but yeah, if you go click on the 3 dots here, and you can disable auto updates, and then you'll get to choose when you upgrade.
Okay, thanks.
So how do we find out which current version we have?
So in Lightroom, it depends on Mac or PC about where it's at. On PC, it's help and about, and on Mac, it's file, or it's a menu preferences. Yeah, so this is 10.1.1 that I have, and my own personal use has been fine with 10.1.1, but I've been reading in the forums about all the people that it especially for Mac, it's been a very bad release for the Mac platform.